Hello and welcome to part one of Unmanaged Scenario in RAP. So today I am starting a new series on how we can create an unmanaged RAP uh, and understand what unmanaged RAP is. So what we will be going to look into this whole series is understand how unmanaged scenario works. We will try to figure out the difference between the managed and unmanaged RAP. We will also see some of the other artifacts that constitutes the process. And by the end of this series, we will be able to create a transactional app using unmanaged RAPBO. We will also try to understand some of the concepts like numbering, validations, determinations, right? All those things, how we can actually implement it here, because by default, the uh, managed scenario is actually taking care of everything by default on the validations, determinations in itself. Okay, we will try to understand each and every process on how we should go about doing it. So moving on, let us first understand what unmanaged RAPBO is. Now, this is a development approach given by SAP where the developer has more control over the process. That means we will have to actually write everything. Nothing will be done by the framework. Of course, it gives a framework which we have to use. RAP is a framework, guys. So we have to confine ourselves to the RAP framework that we have. And on top of that RAP framework, we have to write our own code. Okay. Uh, where is this been used? It is being used on when we need to write our own logic for data retrieval, manipulation, and data saving. Okay, especially in case of creating a sales order or using a BAPI or something, right? This would be the right approach to actually go and do it because we will be getting the data on the screen, and then using the BAPI, we can actually create the sales order or whatever BAPI we want to call. And that is why it gives us more flexibility on how we should process and how we can save the data. It also gives us a direct access to the database, and hence we can define our own CDS model the way we want. Okay. And we have a direct access to database tables. We can directly go and insert, update, and delete, right? All these operations we can do on the database by ourselves. That is where RAP unmanaged scenario comes in. Now, in unmanaged scenario, SAP RAP framework will not do the CUD operations. Rather, we have to do our own. We have to code the create, update, delete, and read method by ourselves. Explicitly, we'll have to give us. Now, what the advantage of this is that it gives us the full control on the data or on the process that we have to actually go and implement. Now, the flexibility that we get here is we have more freedom on implementing more complex logic for validations, for determinations. So it is kind of gives us a free platform or free area, free field where we can go and write our own logic the way we want. Okay, that is that is why it is more flexible compared to the managed scenario. Though unmanaged seems initially to be a complex uh, way of doing things, but once you know the concept, and in this series, we will learn the concept so well that you will understand how the things works in what direction and stuff like that, so that it will be very very easy for you to create your own unmanaged RAP. Okay, and it also allows us to go and implement other custom requirements. Say, for example, if I have in my case, if you might have seen my earlier manage scenario, we will be actually using the same uh, tables to actually create a unmanaged scenario as well, so that the continuity is intact and you will understand how we can actually go about doing it. But say, for example, if the customer, while creating the contact, if an email ID is being given, right now using the unmanaged scenario, I have more freedom that I can actually send an email to that particular contact that, okay, welcome to our group or something of that sort. Just an example, guys, but more complex would be like, okay, when you are actually creating, say, for example, a sales order, and at the same time, a purchase order has to be created. Okay, that is when you have to actually go and call this, or you have some custom development where a workflow has to be triggered. All those kind of things can be done using this custom requirement uh, that can be implemented, and that is where it is giving us more flexibility on the complete process, guys. So where we have to use, unlike the managed scenario, RAP frameworks, where the RAP frameworks controls the CRUD operations, in unmanaged scenario, we have to write the logic for each and every operations manually, explicitly by us. Okay, so where this approach will best suit, when we need to work directly to the database table, one or more, without any relation. So there is no entity foreign relationship between the tables, and you have to actually work in such scenarios. You can actually go and say, for example, you want to have an application log created at the end when the process is happening on SLG1 or stuff like that. Those kind of things can be actually also been done. Our application needs a complex business logic. This is where SAP managed scenario will not help us, because it takes only the entities that we define and it operates on that entity for create, update, and delete operation. So if there is more complex logic, unmanaged scenario is the best approach. And the the last part is, if you already have the business logic implemented as part of legacy code base, then also it is a best idea that we should go and use the uh, unmanaged scenario. Okay. Now, how unmanaged scenario works? As we have seen, managed or unmanaged is always defined in the behavior definition of interface. Okay, the root interface will have a behavior definition, as can be seen here. Okay, and that one, that root entity will have also a child entity. We will also see if we can actually start with the root entity first and then try to add the composition to it, as what we have done in managed scenario as well. I will say how it goes, but you know the concept now on how we should go and add a composition tree. But for a root entity and the corresponding child entity, there will be only one and only one behavior definition created on the root, and everything, every child entity behavior definition should be part of that behavior definition. So we will have only one behavior definition for each root entity that will have the characteristic, like if you want to make the field mandatory or read only, all those things, e tag and stuff like that, and the standard operations that we have seen. Now, the difference between the managed and unmanaged is that in the behavior implementation, we have a flexibility because we are coding it to write our own code. So we can actually invoke a local class method that will actually manage the database operations. That is the process that we should actually follow in our unmanaged scenario, guys. Okay, always remember, don't just implement your code, directly in the behavior implementation. Of course, you can do that as well, but it is always better to use it in a local class, because behavior implementation now will be divided into two parts. One is the interaction phase, and the second is the saving phase. Okay, the save sequence is what they call. Okay, and unmanaged behavior will invoke the save sequence to perform the CRUD operation. Okay, then the save sequence method in turn will call the auxiliary class or this class an auxiliary class to perform the CRUD operation. So generally, the local method or local class methods will be called in our all the methods. Like now, interaction phase will have its own methods. We will look into those methods going ahead, and saving will have its own methods. So we as a developer, we will have to understand which methods are getting called when and what sequence. Accordingly, once you know that whole concept, then it is very, very easy, guys. Okay, don't think that unmanaged scenario is difficult. It is pretty easy once you understand the concept. Okay, so let us understand how the BO runtime works. Now, during the managed scenario, we have the interface section, and we know that okay, we are the interface section. When we save, the database is updated, whether it is a draft or a normal PO. That is being managed by RAP framework. But in this case, we will have to do it. Okay. So in our case, what will happen in during the interaction phase, data from the UI element are stored in a transactional buffer. Because now remember this point very clearly, that in unmanaged scenario, the all the operations are in two phases. One is the interaction phase, and second, the save sequence. Okay, there are two phases, and we will have to deal with both the phases ourselves, because this is an unmanaged scenario. Okay, now during the interface interaction phase, we will be actually calling some of the methods. Say for example, early numbering will be called during the interaction phase, because we need to fill in the key fields during when the person creates or click on the create button. At that point in time, we need to have the uh, key fields defined. Then that will be called during the interaction phase. But if we are using the late numbering, then it will be called during the save sequence, because we don't want to actually miss any of the numbering systems. Okay. In our case, we are using Kuwait ID, but for example, sales order or purchase order, you don't want to miss any of the uh, numbers, because each and every number in this organization is questionable. So in such scenarios, early numbering is not the right approach. Late numbering will be the right approach. And in unmanaged, we will try to see if we can manage both. Okay. But early numbering, I have already shown you how it works in our uh, in our managed scenario already. So in this session, maybe as I've told you, that we will try to see if we can actually do it in our unmanaged scenario. So probably I might use the late numbering in our unmanaged scenario. Now, once the interaction phase is done, when the user presses on save button, the save sequence will be called. And it is not just a method, it is a series of methods that will be called in a respective sequence, and that is why it is called a save sequence. You should know what save sequence is, what are the methods that are in the save sequence process, and in what sequence they are called. Once you know that, it is easy, guys. Okay, now the save sequence the uh, is the process where we will validate our transactional buffer. If there are errors, we will just return it back. So all our validations will be done in our save sequence itself. Okay. So validations also we have to code, because validations by default in managed scenario will be done by the RAP framework, but here we will have to do it. Okay, everything we have to do it, and that is why people feel that okay, unmanaged scenario is difficult to implement. No, it's not. It's just a lengthy process. That's it. Okay. So upon successful save, finally the transaction buffer should be cleared. Okay. And the saved data should be returned back to the interaction phase to actually show them on the screen. Now, let us understand what save sequence is. Now, save sequence is a part of RAPPO runtime. Okay. That's the runtime sequence. Save sequence is a process that will be called when a save is done and at least something is either been added or modified. If you just edit a record without any modification, if you press save, the RAP framework will tell you that nothing has been changed. So there is no point in actually going and calling the save sequence. Okay, you save when you have modified something. Okay, now it is triggered at least after at least one successful modification is performed during the interaction phase, and it saves the data to the transactional buffer and then to the database. Okay, it saves the data from the transactional buffer to the database. So in our interaction phase, everything will be stored in a transactional buffer, and a save sequence is the process which will move the data from the transactional buffer to the database. Now it has got three phases. Okay, these are early save, late save, and cleanup. Now, early save, okay, all these methods that you see here, okay, finalize, check before save, adjust number, save, cleanup, and cleanup finalize. Okay, this is the sequence that we have. But how it is being called? Early save phase will actually allow you to finalize your data. We will see what it is. It will call finalize and check before save. And if anything goes wrong here, it will call up cleanup finalize method. And in late sequence save phase, if this is successful, it will call the adjust number if it is a late numbering method, and then it will save it. If it is early numbering method, adjust number is not needed. Okay, then save will be um, called, or save modified also if you have using unmanaged save. Okay, now and then once this is saved, then the actual cleanup will be called, and the final phase is the cleanup where all the transactional buffer will be cleared. So this is how the save sequence work. Okay, now let us understand the sequencing method of the save sequence. Okay, and remember this is exactly the save sequence that we need to remember. Okay, make this uh, image, actually fit in your mind. Okay, finalize, check before save, adjust number, save, and then the cleanup methods. Okay, there are six methods, guys, out of which only five will be called at any given point in time. So cleanup will be called once this data is saved, and cleanup finalize will be called if there is any inconsistency in the data during the finalize or check before save. Okay, now what finalize method allows us to do? It will allow us to do any final modification to the entity that we are trying to save. Okay, say for example, in our case, if we want to actually go and uh, calculate our age, right, that we can do it in our finalize method. Okay, or if you want to do some of the cleanup, like uh, for example, if you want to convert your first name, middle name, and last name always to an uppercase, So far we have always been looking into everything as a upper lower case. But if you want to move that as a upper case, that also can be done in your finalize. Once the finalize is successful, and you see, this is not an not a mandatory thing to be implemented. It is redefined but not implemented. Implementation is not mandatory for finalize. Okay, but you have to redefine it. And redefinition, when you create your class, it will be always done by the framework. That class will be, when it is created, all those methods will be given to us, like redefinition, redefinition, redefinition. Okay. Similarly, once this is successful, then check before save will be done. And this method will be responsible to validate the data before any commit happens to the database. Okay, once again, this is also an optional part. If you want to validate, you validate. You can have validations you if you want, or if you don't want, that's fine. But if you have a validation and that fails, then cleanup finalize will be called. Okay, remember this point. It's after check before save. If there is any error, no cleanup, but cleanup finalize method will be called. So in that case, if you want to do something, some changes to your buffer table, say for example, the name contains some at the rate or some other symbol, which is not the correct way of actually giving the name. You, if you want to clear that, only that field you can clear it off, and that can be done using the cleanup finalize method. Okay, finalize will allow us to do the final modification. Check before save will allow us to validate our data. If there is any error, cleanup finalize will be called. Okay, again, this is an optional part, that's fine. Once those things are final, okay, this is where it is a point of no return. Okay, guys, it is a point of no return. That means whatever validations and everything that you have to do, you have to do it using uh, before this. Okay, once you cross your check before save, then things are gone. Then it will go and save the database. Even if it is a wrong data, it will be saved. Now, what happens after the adjust numbering is done? Save sequence has to be done. Okay, and this is the method which will commit the changes to the database. Map messages, uh, it's not I have created it. If you want to map the messages to the again to the behavior or the front end, you can do that. Finally, clean up will be called, not clean up finalize, it is clean up. That will be used to just clear the transactional buffer and roll back the entities. Okay, so this is how the whole uh, RAP unmanaged scenario works, guys. Okay, this was just an introductory part. I have tried making you understand how much or what best way we can actually utilize our unmanaged scenario in, when to use it, what are the components that constitutes to SAP RAP unmanaged scenario. Going ahead, we will dig uh, deeper into each and every processes and understand what method needs to be implemented and stuff like that. Okay, so for now, I will like to stop here, requesting you to please do like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Hit the bell icon, share it to others so that others should also get benefited out of this, and hope this series will be beneficial for you as well. With that, thank you and happy learning.